Welcome to the first episode of Grassroots Advocacy. My name is Jeff Wellman, and I have the privilege of serving NACA and you. I am really pleased and excited to be spending this time with you talking about advocacy, which is something that is very important. Grassroots advocacy provides the opportunity for us to serve as a voice for those who are not necessarily always heard, our nation's frail, elder, and disabled citizens. It's also an opportunity for us to represent our profession as first-line caregivers, and it's also an opportunity for us to be ambassadors for the long-term care and post-acute service environment. So we will be meeting every Thursday, and we will be covering advocacy and what it means and how we can approach it. In order for us to really get started and really have a good frame for why advocacy might be important, please allow me to ask some questions and then provide a brief commentary after each one. Is there a reason you care? Is the reason that you care about our nation's frail and elder citizens because you love and respect them and value them? This is probably the most common thing I hear as I get the opportunity to travel across the United States, is that the reason I'm serving in long-term care is because I love, value, and respect the men and women I take care of on a daily basis. Absolutely powerful. So then, do you find yourself disappointed or frustrated even when you perceive or when you see that they are not receiving the quality of life and quality of care that you believe they're entitled to? You know, that's probably the most common frustration that I've heard as I've been traveling across the country. And, you know, and you could think of it this way. I was talking with a young nursing assistant down in Oklahoma not too long ago, and she was sharing with me that she had an elder resident that was having to get up at 7:30 in the morning. And she was like, I don't get it. He worked second shift most of his life, and he's 90 years old. So why can't he sleep in as late as he wants? You know, that's a really valuable question to ask, especially in a person-centered environment. So then we could think about this next question. Do you find yourself feeling like people aren't listening to you or your peers? You know, that can be so frustrating, and there's a body of research that really shows us that nursing assistants don't feel like they're being listened to. And I think there are basically three kinds of reasons for that. One reason for that is that we are all so busy. And in the nursing center in particular, people are so busy with their scope of practice, with their list of responsibilities, with their hall assignment, that it becomes difficult to really stop and listen and pay attention. The second reason I believe that we have these challenges is because some organizations are still deeply entrenched in a medical model of care, which really isn't very well suited for for empowerment and autonomy and self-direction. The third reason I think that it really bears out for us when it comes to why people aren't hearing us is because we haven't necessarily become very talented when it comes to framing our message, keeping it sweet, short, and to the point. So let's consider this next question. Do you believe that the post-acute and long-term care environment have more to offer than the average citizen knows? You know, we get to see on a daily basis some really wonderful and miraculous, extraordinary things that the folks, John Q. Public, doesn't really get to see. For example, that nursing assistant who stays over, even after the shift is over, to hold the hand of an elder who is transitioning from this life into the next. That's absolutely extraordinary. Or what about that group of caregivers who come in on their day off to do fundraisers so that they can provide elders who don't have very many resources birthday presents, Christmas presents, holiday recognitions. Those are things that the general public just doesn't have a perception of. And we, as we act as advocates, have the opportunity to reshape that view. Let's consider this next item. Are you proud of the place you work? Do you want others to be able to see how wonderful you see that care setting? This is something that you can do as advocates, and there are some really great organizations to serve in. There are some great long-term care leaders that you want to really be able to recognize. It's easy to look at the things that maybe aren't so positive or aren't so rewarding. I would encourage you to think that maybe investing in focusing on the things that are worth reporting and supporting and recognizing, that's more powerful in the long run. So let's look at this then. So do you find yourself worrying about whether we will have the resources and the equipment and the money and all of the things that we need in order to be able to deliver exceptional care to those in our care, in our trust? Because long-term care is primarily funded by Medicare and Medicaid, we have to really think about that. There's a lot of talk in Washington, D.C. and in state houses across the United States about whether the Medicare and Medicaid funding is sufficient or whether we can decrease it. Well, as I travel across the nation and I talk with long-term care leaders at every level, one of the things they share with me is that we're already operating on a budget that is below what we can afford. For example, I was visiting down in Oklahoma not too long ago, and they project that they spend every dollar that they get in Medicaid reimbursement, and then they still have to pay out $20 per day per person in order to be able to meet the basic care. And I think we can all agree that basic care is not what our frail, elder, and disabled citizens deserve. What they deserve is exceptional care. So as an advocate, you can communicate with your elected officials, with your policymakers, with people in your community to help them understand how vital Medicare and Medicaid reimbursement are to the delivery of exceptional care. There's also, when we think about advocacy at that level, it's also appropriate to think about the regulations that are provided through the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services. Now, I'm confident that if you ask somebody from CMS, they would say that the goal of CMS is to help promote quality of life and quality of care. Occasionally, we have a disconnect between what we see they want and what is actually possible. As caregivers, you have the ability, whenever CMS is making regulations, or getting ready to deliver regulations, you have the ability to speak up through the public comment period and through a variety of other means. And so, as you've been listening to the questions and the responses, if some of those things have resonated with you, have made sense, have said, yeah, that's right, then you likely are going to be a great candidate to serve as a grassroots advocate for your elders, for your profession, and for long-term care. So at this point, you might be saying to yourself, well, what is this guy asking, or what does he mean? Well, in order to kind of move this conversation along and to provide some concept about what an advocate is and what advocacy is, let's take a moment to look at these definitions. So the first definition comes from Merriam-Webster, and it's really about looking at an advocacy is the act of speaking up on a particular message or a particular issue of concern. It's about getting a point across that supports or defends a particular concern. Then let's think about what an advocate is. An advocate is the actual individual person, that could be you or I, or you and I, that actually goes and raises their voice to make a particular point about a given issue. So, for example, When we talk about Medicaid cuts, which is something that we heard not too awfully long ago down in Oklahoma, it's okay for us, for you and I, to contact our elected officials and say, look, if you cut Medicaid or Medicare, these are the potential consequences for our elders. Is this really the right thing to do? So that's the advocate. That's you and I, the advocate. Now, because so much of what happens in terms of advocacy actually starts at the bedside, we really need to look at grassroots advocacy and what that means. And so what that really means is, because you are at the bedside, because you are working with your elders on a day-to-day basis, because you understand the experiences of your fellow caregivers, because you see the long-term care system not for how it's perceived, but for how it really is, you have the opportunity to serve as a grassroots advocate, to raise your voice, to exercise your passion, your care, your commitment, to bring all of those talents and abilities that are innate and within you to shaping a conversation that might have a very different outcome if you elected not to participate. So you might be thinking, well, Jeff, what are you really asking? And I have two things I'd like to ask you for today. First is, I'd like to ask you to join me every Thursday for Grassroots Advocacy, so we can continue this discussion, so that we can gain our power and our experience, so that we deliver the voice for those who may be voiceless. The second thing I'd like to ask you to do is to really take some time to reflect and see if becoming a grassroots advocate is something that makes sense for you. And if it does, please make sure to join me every Thursday, and please feel free to take the information that we're giving and to practice it, so that each time you become a better and better advocate for those you love and care for. So you might be saying, well, what's next? Well, when we talk about advocacy, advocacy is a very large, very complex conversation to have, because there are so many different facets or elements. In the coming weeks, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to look at what it takes to become an advocate. Then we're going to look at what are the different ways we can serve as an advocate. We're going to look at those on the national, the local, state, and national levels. Then we're going to look at different approaches or different strategies or techniques, whatever term you want to use, for how to most effectively advocate for long-term care, for our profession, and for the men and women who are so very deserving of our support and our advocacy. So to wrap up today's discussion, please consider this quote by William Faulkner. Never be afraid to raise your voice for honesty and truth and compassion, and against lying and greed. If people all over the world did this, the earth would be a very different place. William Faulkner. I look forward to seeing you next Thursday.